Hello, hello, and welcome to everybody else who has just arrived in the meantime. And I am Alex, moderating this discussion for Dr. Radha Prasanna, and I will just be quickly posting the schedule of the session in the chat as well as explaining it. And the schedule of the session, I'll quick hope 5 minutes, maybe less for me to explain what's going on, who we are talking about, and then we move on to the bulk of the section, a presentation on integrated assessments for mitigation and adaptation co-benefits and trade-offs, a RISE case study, then a 20-minute Q&A, and finally a closing session at the end. And while we are doing that, I would like to say very much a great thank you to Dr. Prasanna for agreeing to come here. She is an incredible scientist with 34 years of research and mentoring experience in microbiology and prospecting ecological habitats. She's been and she has achieved a she has achieved an incredible amount over a very long and storied career with investigating many different types of cyanobacteria across crops, their role in as plant growth, promoting inoculants for rice and other staple crops. She's published more than 300 research papers, delivering more and delivered far more expert lectures and keynote talks than I can even begin to properly list. And I believe that we are in for a session of great interest and one that will teach us a great deal about the field in which we all find ourselves. I encourage you all, if you have questions, if you think of questions, to please write them in the chat. I will be keeping an eye on it so that we can ask questions during the Q&A. And during the Q&A, I will be selecting people to ask questions directly to Dr. Prasanna. And I hope that you are all looking forward to the excellent research and case study that we are about to experience. And with 2 minutes left on the clock, I will hand over to the main event. So whenever you're ready, Dr. Prasanna, take us away.
Thank you, Alex. Should I share my presentation now?
Yes.
Please do.
To cover the shirts we have Maritas.
Is it visible?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, the SRI team here, and for giving me this opportunity to speak to you all and enjoy learning from you all too. So I would be talking about, I'm a microbiologist by profession, so I would be talking about a group of organisms, cyanobacteria, on which I have been working right from 1985 for the master's program, then my PhD doctoral program, and then on as a scientist. And presently, I serve as the head of the Division of Microbiology at the ICR Indian Agricultural Research Institute. And I have been working, cyanobacteria are my passion, so I love talking about them. So I hope you too will enjoy whatever I'm going to tell you. So some of it may be too scientific, I think. Please let me know, and you are free to ask me questions at the end of the session. And so I've just given the title as revisiting the role their role as nutrient enriching and resource conserving options under SCI. I was introduced to SRI by Professor Uphoff. He's a great friend of mine. And no, my presentation would be incomplete if I don't thank him for introducing me into it. And we have had long discussions in Cornell University when I had visited once. And after that, we keep a constant email contact. And he's always been a very driving force, sending me papers, making me read so much of the research that's going on around. Unfortunately, in IRI where I work, SRI is not a very popular one, but we are trying now that we have the resource crunch for water, for nutrients and all that. So therefore, we are slowly moving on to systems of, crop intensification. So I have been working with a large number of crops, so I would just be telling you something about them. So as we all know, I think the SCI or the SRI is basically an agroecological approach. I mean, we basically want that the plant should grow well. It should have better root growth, better nutrient uptake, and also it should be able to enrich the soil further for the next crop. So thereby using microbials is a very excellent way of doing that, because it not only reduces our dependence on external inputs, because they are able to mobilize the biological processes going on not only in the soil but inside the plant too. I think in the present time we are all aware that the plant itself is a holobiont, meaning it has microorganisms everywhere and anywhere. And there's a huge competition and antagonism going inside the plant itself. And when we add them as an inoculant, further action takes place, and how beneficial the inoculation is basically depends on how, the introduced organism is able to adapt and take the most of the benefits and give it to the plant. So this also helps to reduce our reliance on chemical inputs and or inorganic fertilizers and pesticides. And I'll be telling you how cyanobacteria can do all that. So overall, we'll be able to reduce or mitigate the environmental and the health hazards. Also that the adverse impact it has on the soil ecosystem. So that is basically, I think, is what we are all dealing with, that we want an agroecological mode of agriculture. So why cyanobacteria? Cyanobacteria are one of the oldest organisms on Earth. And it was not until these organisms appeared on Earth that oxygen was found. And it is said that no other photosynthetic organism is as efficient as this organisms. So you can see the timeline here where the Proterozoic era is called as the era of cyanobacteria. And you must have all studied in school, I think, the symbiosis, how the ancient prokaryote got into the cell of another cell, and then it became a total endosymbiont. And then slowly those endosymbionts became organisms. And so these are all the different, they are from the beginning of, how life started, basically. And so they are integral because they have given not only to the environment the oxygen evolution, which made it more amenable for the other organisms, but they also helped the plant. So many of the genes in the plant, if you look up literature, you will find are belonging to the cyanobacteria. So when you look at cyanobacteria as a whole, they are very important for biodiversity because they can capture, store, and recycle energy and nutrients. They are very good at, sequestering organic matter and leading to the development of biocrust. They promote soil formation, and I'll slowly tell you about all these things. So basically, I consider cyanobacteria as the ecological life support, which provides the ecosystem to function to their best along with their biomes. Now, cyanobacteria or blue-green algae are basically, as you can see here, they are a very, very morphologically diverse type of organisms. You have unicellular, you have multicellular, you have filamentous organisms. So all these, so I've just given you some pictures as to how they grow and how they look. So they have not only an important role, as I said, in agroecology, but they're also a very important role in as a source of natural colors, biopolymers, pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals. You might have heard of the trip, the astronauts took the cyanobacteria to the Mars because that is a functional food. Spirulina, everybody might have heard of spirulina or spirulina as you can call it, is a source of single cell protein. So these are very, very unique type of organisms, and I have enjoyed working with them. But their main role in agriculture, if you look at, is basically as nitrogen and carbon fixers. Because they photosynthesize, they help in the carbon getting fixed. And most of the cyanobacteria, not all, have particular cells called as the heterocyst, which you can see here. It is an airtight compartment which helps to fix the nitrogen. So why is it essential? You know that the environment is made up of more than 90% nitrogen, but it is not, plants cannot take it up. So these are the bacteria, which we also call them as diazotrophs. There are several bacteria which can do that because they all have the enzyme which we call as nitrogenase. Now, these cyanobacteria have a very, very different level of, taking care of that process by having a specialized cell called as the heterocyst. And this nitrogenase, the only problem is it is very oxygen sensitive. So that's why these cyanobacteria decided to have a separate cell for that, wherein they can fix the nitrogen and provide that nitrogen to the cells. So as a filamentous organism, you will find there are heterocysts like every 10 cells. Whenever the nitrogen level goes low, then there is another heterocyst formed, and it helps to fix the nitrogen from the abundant nitrogen which is there in the atmosphere. So it is, and also their carbon, now their role in carbon sequestration is getting a lot of attention because we are seeing a lot of climate change, and we are expecting a large amount of CO2 to increase in the atmosphere because their major function is photosynthesis, and they have specialized structures called as carboxysomes, which you see here, which have both the two plant CO2 fixing enzymes, rubisco and carbonic anhydrase, which are also there in plants. So these help to basically sequester the carbon. Therefore, they can, even if you grow them in very high CO2 environments, they can actually take up all that and make it into cell biomass, which can then get transferred into the soil when they die, and they will enhance the organic matter or the carbon in the soil. A recent paper concluded that, 100 tons of algal cell dry weight could fix uptake of more than 183 tons of CO2. So this is one way of, reducing the atmospheric CO2 in the coming times when it's going to be really very high. So it's a safe way, and it is turning it into biomass. So it's like, you can make wealth from it, the excess CO2 which is there. And I would like to point out here about the significance of cyanobacteria in agriculture, what was known and what we have done, our team has done over the years. They are known to be free living, as well as they live in symbiotic or loose associations. And most of the studies, if you had looked in the 1970s, or they were basically on rice, because the rice field, the aquatic environment is somehow very conducive for these organisms. And so because they can fix carbon and nitrogen, so therefore they add nutrients. And indirectly also they are known for their role in releasing vitamins, growth promoting substances. And most important, as I said, the contribution, about 25 kg nitrogen per hectare per season can be fixed through these organisms. And because they produce a large amount of growth promoting substances, they can also increase plant growth and thereby grain yield. And because they grow on the surface of the water in the rice field, the typical rice field which is flooded, they are also able to check weed growth. And at that time in the 1970s, a very low-cost technology, a rural-oriented technology was developed, used wherein for growing these organisms and using them as biofertilizer. But over the years now, we know that cyanobacteria are not only fit as biofertilizers for rice, but also across crops. Also, not only as biofertilizers, they can be biocontrol agents, they can be biofortifying agents, meaning they can increase the micronutrient in the produce, whether it is grains or maize kernels or whatever fruits, they can do that. And even they are there because, as I told you, they are very ancient group of organisms. They have, undergone through evolution. They can adapt to moisture deficit, alternate wetting, drying, or SCI regimes, or different cultivation modes. And we have now, kind of optimized the use of cyanobacteria as seed coating, or as a foliar, or as a soil drench. Not just like the typical olden times, it was only they were just broadcast over the standing water. And through the different research taken all over the world, we have learned more about what actually is the crosstalk between cyanobacteria with other bacteria and fungi in the soil, as well as with the phytopathogenic fungi and totally with the plant. So we now know more. So as I said, they are able to grow in diverse. I just thought I would just show you like what are the different types of environment you can find. Now the biological crusts are becoming extremely of significance. You must have heard of BSCs, the short form is, in deserts and all, for greening the deserts. Because they can grow along with other organisms, form a crust. They're able to protect the soil from getting eroded. So these crusts are gaining a lot of importance. They can grow on rocks, stones, and they can grow on, in between the different pebbles if they are there. And they can even grow inside, like chasmo, it's an endolithic, meaning inside the holes that are there. Even this is a sand containing an endolithic cyanobacterium. Now, these are another, like the hot spring. You must have heard of the Yellowstone National Park, which is very famous for the, very high temperatures and very acidic conditions. So these organisms can grow there also, as you can see here. In all the stromatolites and which you have seen in caves, you must have seen something green oozing out from them. So these are cyanobacteria and gypsum crusts. And you can see these kind of mats in oceans and even any water bodies, because they can grow anywhere and everywhere. And as I said, they form associations with several members of the plant kingdom. For example, Gunnera, which is an angiosperm. This is how they look if you take a cross section of the plant. And they can also be seen in the root sections of Cycas, which is a gymnosperm. Then they grow as moss, parts of the moss. You have seen moss growing on rocks. They are there. And they also grow with azolla. This is of agricultural importance because azolla is used as a green manure as well as, a nitrogen fixing agent in cultivation, rice cultivation particularly. So azolla is a pteridophyte. And then I'm just showing you that with the rice, of course, they have a very, very close association right from. And we were able to show that they are able to even enter into the roots. Here, these are some micro pics showing you how they can actually enter into the roots. So that makes it a very close association with the rice plant. During our research over the years, we know in India, we have different types, soil and ecology types where rice is grown. So this is, you can see it's very dry here. This is a saline actually area where rice is grown. This is another place where it's upland rice. This is, what we call as, it is where the harvesting of this rice is undertaken in boats. The plants are so tall. And Aduturai is known to be the home of rice in India, because that is where rice is mostly grown and then it was popularized. So we have diverse rice-based ecologies, irrigated, rain-fed, deep water. Ghagra Ghat, which I was telling you, this one is basically the deep water rice. This is the only deep water rice in the world, globally, where rice is grown, and those plants, I've gone there. I've collected soil samples from there. You have upland, you have hilly, you have lowland, which is the most common, of course. And all these regions also exhibit a wide range of EC and pH. So I had a project in my initial years as a scientist, wherein I went all around the country, collecting soil samples, bringing back the rice plant, and isolating cyanobacteria not only from the soil samples, but also from the roots and the root region, and incubating the root in the media and trying to see if we can get cyanobacteria. So many of these cyanobacteria which we use now are mainly from that. So our approach was that no organism basically grows alone in an environment. So it has to interact with different organisms. So why not try to make it interact and develop consortia with bacteria and fungi, which are also beneficial to the crop? So why use them separately or use different, tell the farmer to use so many things, he gets very, awed by it. So try to develop some kind of consortia. So that was one of the early work that we did. And we had a large number of germplasm of bacteria, fungi, cyanobacteria from various rice and wheat growing areas, as well as from some, very, very ecologically very inert areas where there's nothing grows. We had a lot of them. So basically we combined made different combinations. So we first, test their properties, what are the plant growth promoting traits they have. And we took the best ones and combined them. And we took in the phytotron is a place where the controlled conditions are there. So we test them there. Then we test them in net house inside where the soil is not autoclaved or it is just normal. Then we go on to the field. So all our work has been through this approach wherein we have tested them from lab to land in this way. That's because the farmer, once he has to use it, we have to be sure of the properties of the biofertilizer. Now, why do we need consortia? As I said, many times it was found that when we have single microbial inoculants, they are very erratic. Sometimes they don't perform because after all, you are introducing an organism into an already, there's a war going along in the rhizosphere or the root region. There are lots of microorganisms. So you are introducing one. So it may not. So if you have a consortium, you have more number of organisms. Therefore, the chance is that some of them will, kind of survive or they'll help each other and they may do. So we basically borrowed this concept from nature because in nature, no microbe exists in isolation. So they may thrive better. So we therefore characterize them and engineer different consortia. And this consortia will have all the properties of the different microbes, which may have different. For example, one may be a very good nitrogen fixer. One may be a phosphate mobilizer. One may be a micronutrient mobilizer. So we take all of them and put them together. So that's what the consortia concept is all about. But we also have a novel concept which we used in agriculture is the biofilms. Now, biofilms are nothing, you must have heard of biofilms. They are also not they are a nuisance, when they get on our teeth or in our system, they form and they stick and they don't move. So, and they cause a lot of diseases and all. The plaque, the dental plaque is basically a biofilm. But we thought, why not develop a biofilm which will adhere to the root or the soil particles, so that they don't get moved on, by other organism or other macro, micro, fauna, flora. So now we knew that cyanobacteria basically has a very thick extracellular mucilage or a polysaccharide layer. And that we know is always a very nutrient-rich environment because this organism is doing a lot of functions of carbon and nitrogen. So all bacteria would love to get associated with it. Therefore, we try to use that mucilage and we try to introduce already known, organisms which are used as biofertilizers or as biocontrol agents so that, we can have a combination instead of a consortia. This is basically when we say a consortia, we mean different organisms are grown differently and then mixed together. When we say it's a biofilm, we add the partner to the, to the cyanobacteria and then they both grow together. So that is the difference between a consortium or a biofilm. So we try to see how we can do it because for long it was known, that the problem why cyanobacteria were not widespreadly used, because many of them got eaten up by the zooplankton. And it was also shown by Grant way back in, I think in early 1900s that those which have a large amount of mucilage are not eaten up because they are a deterrent. When an organism tries to eat it, a zooplankton, that mucilage will kind of irritate it. It can't really go into it. Therefore, we thought like this would be something which would have anti-grazer or anti-predator traits. And therefore, we can have a better and effective inoculant for the rice wheat cropping system. That's where I began. So these are the kind of biofilms. As you can see, these organisms are growing, bacteria are growing. These are cyanobacteria. And as you can see, some cells all growing together next to it. This has been stained, like we use what we call in microbiology gram stain. And this you can see how it's like a film which is covering the cyanobacterial filaments. So this is what is basically a biofilm. Now, this is again a larger picture showing you a biofilm. And we were able to show that, that in the root also they can actually colonize the root zone, and we took electron microscope photograph. So the biofilm is basically a multifunctionality we are having, which may have synergistic, it may have additive or complementary traits as compared to each of the biofilm partners. So further we decided, okay, now we looked at them as this one. So what are their metabolites. Now, from earlier stages, we knew that they had plant growth promoting properties. So now we started looking at what their metabolites are. So some of the early stages of work had shown that cyanobacteria produce a large number of biomolecules, which include like cyanotoxins. I think many people may be thinking of cyanobacteria because of the cyanotoxins, because these are very popular or not popular, meaning very prevalent in the temperate conditions, not in tropical. In tropical conditions, the toxin production is not very well, it's not there basically. They may produce some compounds. They also produce non-ribosomal peptides, plant growth hormones, and sugars, lipopolysaccharides, amino acids, phenols and alkaloids, as well as phycobiliproteins. These are a group of colored pigments which are produced by these organisms. So the primary metabolites produced by cyanobacteria basically are C and N. As I said, because they are C and N fixers. So there would be glucose, sucrose, and other polysaccharides. There would be N compounds like glutamate, aspartate, serine. And also they also have phospholipids and glycolipids as a part of their metabolism. Besides these, the secondary metabolites are those like non-ribosomal peptides. These are the toxins basically. They also have a large number of antimicrobial and anti-predatory compounds also are known, like some terpenoids, alkaloids, and certain phenolic compounds. And what is the role of these? Why do these organisms produce them? Because some of these have a lot of role in the protection. For example, they are growing on barren land, so the UV protection. Or as I said, the feeding deterrence or the anti-predatory role. And allelopathy. Allelopathy is a very common one which for most of the organisms, because they have to survive in an environment where others are growing. And in resource competition, many of them produce compounds like siderophores, where there is iron limitation. These help that organism to dominate. And also signaling, plant cyanobacteria signaling, or plant and other microbes, cyanobacteria and other microbes signaling. So these are also very well known. And they're very widely used as pharmaceuticals as well as nutraceuticals. And even now the biofuel production also they are used. Now, as I said, because other functions of these metabolites, which we have already talked about, like biofilm formation, adaptation to stress, defense mechanisms, and nutrient acquisition. Now, we have taken up some studies on the GCMS profiling of these cultures to see what actually they contain, because it was there in literature, but do our cyanobacteria, which we find them useful as biofertilizers, do they produce them? So we were able to show that the major metabolite class is basically sugars and also amino acids. And what were the amino acids? We were able to show like sugars, lactose was very high. And then, for example, glutamic acid, lysine, aspartic acid, these are also very high. Gentobiose, maltose were also very high. This gave us a lot of understanding into what basically the core metabolome, or what it's called the metabolome of the organism, what kind of compounds it produces, we were able to show. And we also did the metabolite profiling of the biofilms. What happens when we add a partner? Does it get, what happens? Are there unusual compounds produced? Are there, a synergy wherein a particular compound is produced more? So it gave us a very great understanding into what actually happens when we inoculate into soil. Because we only knew that when we inoculate cyanobacteria, there is improved plant growth and the soil becomes better. But this helped us to understand actually that sugars, amino acids, as well as organic acids, which are also important for their signaling, are the major compounds that are being produced. And coming to another aspect of these organisms is that they were studied for their fungicidal activity. We just screened a group of, strains, and Anabaena is one genus. Actually, one of the labs working near me, but they used to do a lot of hydrolytic enzymes. They used to do a kind of studies on them. So I said, can cyanobacteria also, because I know that they are so well adapted to so many conditions, do they produce? And we were able to show that they did produce a large number of endoglucanases, other hydrolytic enzymes. So through them, these were important for as fungicidal compounds also. We also identified a benzoic acid as well as a magosculamide-like molecule, which was involved in the fungicidal activity. Now, why is it important? Because Many of the nursery grown crops, had a lot of fungi problems because they used to be mostly nursery damping off. All these were very big problems in nurseries. So use of cyanobacteria, we were able to show that they could also be improved the growth. This is a field experiment. I mean, showing it in a lab is different, on a plate is different, but when we show it in a field, this is a field in one of the cotton fields where, because of the Rhizoctonia solani, who are familiar with fungi would know, is a very, very common, pathogen, fungal pathogen, phytopathogen, we say. So this was troubling, and it was not able to, the crop was very poor. So when we inoculated the seed coating, use the cyanobacterial formulation as seed coating, we were able to get a good growth of the plant. So this is just to show you, they operate at the field level. And we have some of these as products now. We have Cyanobiocon, which is a biocontrol agent. And it is very effective in disease control. And also it also helps in plant growth promotion. It was found to lead to 10 to 40% reduction in disease severity and mortality, and particularly for vegetable nurseries, and as a seed dressing or as a seedling dip or as dried flakes. So we did a large number of experiments with various vegetables, particularly tomato and the Solanaceous crops. This is the same plot, from the plot we did, we also did some studies where we were able to show that, our cyanobacteria actually went and, grew there on the roots. And that is how they help to kind of, the space, competition for the space. And that's how the fungi were not able to grow and the plant was able to be healthy. These are some other studies which have been done by other scientists where, it was very early in 1964 that it was shown that the seed soaking of these cyanobacterial extracts, there was improved germination. But that stopped there. At that time, nobody knew what actually was the compounds. And later on, studies have now shown that there is IAA, which is indole acetic acid, known for its plant growth promotion, gibberellic acid, abscisic acid, cytokinins, besides the nitrogenase activity, which is important for this organism to function as a plant growth promoter. So basically more studies are needed in the terms of metabolomic or transcriptomic to understand further. Even the antifungal potential of cyanobacteria, as has been done by another group, they found that it was rich in alkaloids and phenols, which helped this was a disease in onion. This Alternaria pori which infests the onion. And they were able to show that use of this Nostoc species and Oscillatora species, which contain these compounds, it was able to show biocontrol properties. Now, coming to the biofertilizers in our institute, this is our institute in short is called PUSA, or the name PUSA is because it was founded by Phipps from USA, so it's called PUSA. And also there is a place called PUSA in one of the states in India where our institute was originally located. And because of an earthquake, it had to come to this place in New Delhi, where we are now. So therefore, in PUSA, this biofertilizer was one of the earliest in 1970s, which was developed. And it contributes, as I said, 20 to 30 kg nitrogen and increases the productivity by 8 to 10%. And because they can grow on surfaces and stabilize the soil, they add organic matter, they improve the soil physicochemical properties. And so many of them also solubilize insoluble phosphorus, which is there. And these are some other products which we have developed in the recent years. These products are now applicable to all crops, not just rice. This was first developed only for rice, as it says. It is an algal biofertilizer. So blue-green algae or cyanobacteria is the same, because after the advent of microscopy, they were originally called blue-green algae, but with the advent of microscopy, it came to be known that the cells are basically prokaryotic. They don't have a typical, the cell structure like a eukaryotic cell. Therefore, they were then the name cyanobacteria stuck on. But still, there are farmers who will still call it as blue-green algae only, and many people do right. So there's nothing wrong with it. So this was developed as a very rural technology by Professor Venkatraman in 1970. He is the founder of the blue-green algal technology per se for the farmer. So it was a rural technology wherein you just had to have trays. you had to have just spread the soil on that, and you add water and you sprinkle the algal culture and expose it to sunlight. So then it grows. So you will see that this is how it grows. Can you see the thick mat that is formed? So slowly the method was improvised further, that you can grow in part of the field, you can grow it in your field also at a part, and so that you can use it for your crop. And then we went on to having tanks, and in which we used to grow them. And these are the kind of flakes that we pick up. They can be taken up and then powdered, and then we use them as a biofertilizer. So basically, if you look at biofertilizer production, it would start with the tube culture, liquid flask culture. It would be grown in the indoor tank, 10 days to 12 days. The biomass is taken and it can be mixed with carrier. Or if you've already added the soil as a carrier, then soil becomes the carrier. Or you can grow the biomass separately and mix it with the carrier. Therefore, this was what was the earlier time that we used to do. So these are some of the polyhouses that we have for the growth of these. So these all have tanks, and you can see the growth of their tanks in how the blue-green algae grows here. Some of them are green. This is also shows you an azolla tank. I wanted to show you because we also use azolla as a biofertilizer here in India. So the way see when it starts forming a mat, so with the help of a sieve, they can collect that and then dry it separately also, and then mix with carrier. So this is the biomass, this is the carrier. So in the earlier days, we used to use sieved soil as the carrier. And carrier is anything that is helping your culture to be transported, and in a form that it can be applied to the field. So later on, we started using the fuller's earth. It's also in Hindi, it's called multani mitti. It is used as a face pack by ladies and all, because it's a very, very, very fine, and it's basically sterile. So that's the fun of it, and it can absorb a large amount of water. So this was selected as a carrier, and this was how when we mix it and we get these kind of flakes. Now, when we started work, we looked at an alternative carrier, and we found that the use of paddy straw compost and vermiculite could be a very ideal carrier. Why? Because paddy straw compost is nutritive, and vermiculite provides it that that grainy kind of structure. Therefore, when we apply it to the soil, even if the soil has very, very poor in nutrients, or there is some other problems also, this helps the initial stage of establishment of the cyanobacteria. So we grow them in the lab in huge flasks like these. These are called as Hafkin flasks. And we can also grow them in tanks in big tubs, which we grow. And we then take it out and we mix the culture with the carrier. And then we produce what we call as our different biofertilizers. And we advocate 300 grams per acre, the use of these. If we want to use them for seed coating, we can do that, as you can see here. Or we can use it as for rice when it's transplanted. We keep them inside a bucket where we put the formulation which we have prepared with the cyanobacteria, and we put some water and we put a sticker, which is basically in our work we are using carboxymethyl cellulose 1%. And so then they'll get dipped for 1 hour, and then we'll directly take it for the transplanting. Or you could have the seeds which you could directly use. So the methods of application, we actually improved upon them through the years. Earlier, it was only, over the field. They used to be just fresh cultures, used to be just spread. Then we now said, okay, dipping the nursery raised seedlings in formulation film sticker, and or use as a soil drench. We have been able to show in in a lot of fruits crops that use of them as a soil drench, or a foliar spray also at critical stages of crop helps. And seed coating is a technology we are developing. And hi, Norman.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Sorry, I had a wrong day on my calendar.
Ah, nice. So nice to see you after so long.
Good to see you.
I'm afraid we're running out of time for this part of the session.
Okay. Okay. I'm just going to end off. I mean, there's not much. I'm just going to show you some field work and all what we've done. And this is just to show you, like, we have undertaken for different, for their nutrient use, biocontrol, and crop improvement in across crops, from mung bean, soybean, to aerobic rice, DSR, direct seeded rice, SRI, alternated wetted drying. And in we have 2 seasons in India. We call it as the Kharif, which is the summer, and Rabi, which is the cold season. So we have used them in both crops, both in field experiments as well as in pot experiments. And in chickpea, we got very good results. You can see the nodules here. If people are familiar with the legume crops, these are the ones that actually improved because of our biofilms. And this is the seed coating which we did, which also improves the field emergence, because the coating helped the seed to establish better. And therefore, not only the yields, but also the emergence was better. And at the rice wheat cropping system at IRI, and this we have been using our biofilm inoculants. This is a pic from the SRI plot. You can see the difference between a transplanted rice as well as the plot which has basically the SRI treatment. And we were able to show 40 to 50% enhancement in nitrogen fixation, as well as improvement in the yield. Now, we have developed some inoculants called as a combination of 4 cyanobacterial strain, a consortia, which we are using to date. And we are able to show that many of these, which always fascinated Professor Uphoff, was that the biofortification, that was 13 to 14% increase in iron, zinc, and manganese concentration in the rice, as well as the wheat grains, along with the plant growth and nutrient uptake, which was increased, with yield increase also. So overall, we were able to save about 40 to 60 kg nitrogen per hectare. So that's a large amount of saving, and that's for the farmer. So it's really a resource. So these are some of our recent field experiments wherein we are using this biofilm, which is this Anabaena tuberosa with a trichoderma. And I think February also uses trichoderma a lot, isn't it? And we also have a cyanobacterial consortium, and we give a conservative 25% end savings as always. These are some of our publications. And we've also done some on zinc mobilization, and we have found that not only is the zinc mobilized better, but it also improves the soil in terms of soil. Chlorophyll is a unique parameter which many people do not work on, but we use chlorophyll as an index of photosynthetic biomass, because cyanobacteria are photosynthetic. So if it is higher in the plots where we've added, that means it has established well. And available nitrogen, which even in wheat, we were able to show significant increases. And we are now, this time we have started working with DSR, because with the water scarcity in India, the rice system needs a total overhaul, and we are looking for direct seeded rice. So these are last year's and 2 years of experiments now, which we have done using our cyanobacteria as seed coatings. And we have found our field is very good. We got very good results with our direct seeded rice. And so the coating, and you can see that how much of increase is there versus control, cyanobacteria treated, whatever may be the inoculant. And iron and zinc accumulation in the grain was also significantly enhanced because of these treatments. And we were able to show increased nitrogen fixation also, which stayed along till the harvest stage, and all parameters of enzyme parameters that we do. And we found that cyanobacterium-based seed coating enhanced grain yield by almost 44%. This year, when we took an average of the DSR plus the transplanted rice as an average, we use of cyanobacteria. Interestingly, this is the first time we have done some work on the water productivity, and we were able to show that cyanobacterium-based treatments were able to enhance total water productivity in both systems. Of course, in DSR, it was much higher. And even the irrigation productivity, water productivity, was improved by about 10 to 12% because of the use of cyanobacteria. And as you can see, the total water saving was about 15 to 31%. I don't know whether Amod is there. So Amod has done a lot of work on this area. And we used his, we supported whatever he has done to show that actually we can lead to a lot of water savings in this. We've also done some work earlier with some non-flooded, flooded, and found similar results. And also the partial factor productivity, which we say that how much of the N are we applying and how much are we getting back in the grain, was very high in the DSR and TPR. And so the cyanobacterial seed coating, we are proposing it will reduce the dependence on the soil nutrient pools and promote biologically mediated nutrient assimilation and metabolic enhancement, beside conserving water resources and greater water productivity, along with micronutrient accumulation. So strengthening the support for DSR as a very resource conserving alternative. We've also done similar work in maize, and we've been able to show excellent, Fe and zinc mobilization in the maize hybrids. And we have also done some genetic work to show that there's a upregulation of the genes.
Dr. Prasanna,
Yeah.
I'm afraid we are now quite a bit over time, and we need to. I'm sure that the guests and participants have a lot of questions they would really like to ask you. So I would like to ask you to hurry to a conclusion so we can get to
Okay.
their questions.
So I'll just run through the slides. Can you give me 5 minutes?
3.
3. Okay. I'm going to tell you something about just the greenhouse cultivation also, where we've used cyanobacteria, and not only in flowers, in vegetables. We have found a nutri-fertigation strategy, which is very important, using these cyanobacteria, which can improve nutrient availability as well as growth. And this is a very interesting new work, which we've not published as yet, is that the metabolome of the fruit, is actually very, when we do a foliar spray with cyanobacterium, we were able to show that it changes the entire metabolic pathways towards increasing the fruit lycopene and the phenolic content. These are some microscopic photographs to show how this. And elevated CO2 is, of course, a very important, thing, as I told you earlier. So we've done some work wherein we have shown, because they'll grow better and they also help the plant to grow better. And we've got excellent yields here to show you. And we've also done in soybean and cowpea that we can increase by growing them. And in rice now, we are working now presently in elevated CO2 conditions, and we are finding very, very good results. And special thanks to all my collaborators through the years. And so I conclude with significance of cyanobacteria in agriculture: improved crop gain, yield and quality, reduction in chemical fertilizer use, sustainable pest and disease management, mitigation of GHGs, and sequestering CO2 towards value addition. So basically, these organisms are for sustainable agriculture, resource conservation, and its eco-efficient utilization. So I thank the organizers and all my funding agency, my students, my research team, and all my staff, my teachers, mentor, particularly Professor Afaf, and friends. Thank you very much. So I would like to conclude. We are limited not by our abilities, but by our vision. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Prasanna. That was an incredible presentation, and the passion you have for your work is truly extraordinary, and as is the expertise of yourself and your team. I will move quickly since we have questions and we are a little over time. I will first start by going through the questions that are left in the chat, so that people if anybody who wishes to, can raise their hand to ask a question with their own voices, or think of questions to place in the chat. So starting with Deodat, he asks, what are the main mechanisms by which cyanobacteria contribute to nutrients enrichment and soil fertility in rice systems?
Can I answer?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, because cyanobacteria, as I said, can fix nitrogen, from the air, which all organisms cannot do, because they have these heterocysts, specialized compartments for doing the nitrogen fixation and then passing it along to the plant or the surrounding flora in the soil. Also, they can fix carbon. So therefore, when carbon and nitrogen are the major nutrients anything wants, so therefore, because of that, they are able to provide the plant with this, and also help in mobilizing other nutrients, micronutrients, macronutrients. They produce growth hormones like IAA. So all these help basically the organisms, which are very highly adaptive, to be a very good option for fertilizing the rice wheat cropping system. Anything further you would like to ask?
Yes, there's another question from Hematha Kumar Paramathi. Can all varieties of cyanobacteria be grown separately? Say something like Azolla, earthworms, etc. Can such growing be commercialized? So 2 different questions.
All varieties, I mean, we say genera. So we say we have different genera. So we try to find out which are the best in fixing more nitrogen, or fix more carbon, or they produce. So we try to characterize them. That's the first step that we take. So, and we can grow them separately, and they can also grow together. So that we have to do studies. We have to do these kind of combination studies. And as concerns Azolla is a pteridophyte. But in its, dorsal lobes of the fronds that it has, it houses the cyanobacterium Anabaena azoli. Therefore, it fixes nitrogen. Therefore, it's able to provide nitrogen in a rice system or a flooded crop where there is. So that is how Azolla does. It's a pteridophyte. Earthworms are basically what do you call fauna, which are there, and all cyanobacteria can be grown. I mean, minimal media, as I showed you how we grow them even in soil, they can grow, they form the growth, so they do. And there's some other question, I think.
Yes, Ivan asks, I have questions. What challenges have you observed in maintaining viability and consistency of cyanobacteria inoculants under field conditions? And how well do they coexist with native microbiota and withstand severe abiotic stresses such as drought?
Yeah, our efforts have been actually, we have started with single inoculants and then consortia, and we basically, as I said, we are using both nitrogen fixation as well as the soil chlorophyll as in the indices of how well they are establishing in the soil. And we try to take samples like at different stages of crop and towards the end of the crop to see how much, how much still they are there. I mean, they are viable. And also whether their next crop, they are able to give some fertilization because of their growth. And the only thing is we advocate is that not to put the cyanobacteria when we give the urea. Basically, the crop, when you apply the nitrogen fertilizer, you should not immediately add them. You have to give a gap. Why? Because once you provide a fixed form of nitrogen, these cyanobacteria can become very lazy. They won't fix nitrogen. They'll say, oh, there is available. Why should I do so? So therefore, we advocate that you give a gap. And once you provide any urea or something, those will be available. So after a week, if you put these, they will have some good nutrients also, and then they will fix. And by that time, the nitrogen would have either volatilized or, gone in somewhere. So therefore, then they will fix better, more biomass you will get, and you will be able to get better nitrogen fixation from the atmosphere. And stress, because of the mucilage that they have, they are able to colonize any dry habitat where nothing can grow. Also, they can grow there, and that mucilage helps to also coexist with native organisms. And also because they are fixing carbon and nitrogen, they will give the food to the bacteria which are growing also. So they are a good helping kind of nature basically. So therefore they can withstand the native isolates as also, and also mitigate any stress under which they're growing.
Excellent. Currently, we don't have any hands raised and no questions extra in the chat, so I will have one of my own to perhaps get a bit more detail from you on the co-benefits that exist between your research and SRI in particular. Obviously, I've read your paper, but I would like to hear more about it in your own words, because it seems like this is very much a win-win scenario for both.
In SRI, basically, see, as I said, now with the water resources shrinking, we need to have organisms which can survive even under very poor water deficit condition, moisture deficit conditions, nutrient deficit conditions, because many farmers cannot afford the fertilizers and all. So they are basically able to provide the nutrients and also improve the nutrient mobilization inside the plant. Therefore, their role in SRI or any other system of SCI is that they are able to be resource efficient, because you are able to reduce the nitrogen input that you are going to put. Yeah, some of them have biocontrol attributes, so they can even ward off pests and diseases. And they also have this nutrient, because they can mobilize micronutrients. They're able to fortify their grains. Therefore, you are providing better quality food to the consumer. So I would say it is a win-win situation. I think Professor
Yes.
Apop wants to ask something.
Yes, of course. If you would like to jump in, Norman, please
Yes.
please ask away.
Well, I just wanted to thank Radha profusely for her presentation and to apologize profusely for my having put the webinar onto my calendar for tomorrow. Well, so I'm thankful to Lucy calling me to tell me, no, it's on today. And again, I'm glad this is being recorded so others can have access to it. I've learned a lot from Radha's work over the last 10, 12 years, I think now,
Yes, yes.
working together. I wanted to know whether this presentation, which was like 10 PhD theses all wrapped into one, will be available on the web, either directly from Street Rice or the Research Network, or whether Radha can post it on her IARI website so that we can all have access to it and can study the pages. Every slide was worth 15 minutes. We had only one or two. So is there arrangement being made? Maybe this is a question for February. So this can be accessible to those who want to study the slides slide by slide.
Mhm. I don't
February,
mind. February is there.
February's there.
Yeah, I'm
Yep.
here. Yes, I'm online now.
Will
Yes.
this presentation be available from the web, from you, from Radha, from
Yes.
Street Rice, or whoever? I'm not talking about the presentation one thing, but I'm saying her presentation, each slide is so much information that I'd like to myself be able to look at the slides one by one. I can supplement with the presentation, but mostly
That's what
the PowerPoint is like a whole course of microbiology of cyanobacteria.
Yeah,
Thank
we're
you.
going to make the slide available on our website, and also
Okay.
the recordings will be made available on our YouTube channel. Yeah, Norman.
Good.
Yes.
Excellent.
Okay, well, thank you very much,
Thank you.
February and Alex, but especially Radha for a marvelous informative. Radha's been educating me about cyanobacteria for quite a while now. They're really sort of stepchildren in the microbiology area because we're fixated on bacteria and fungi. We're getting to be involved with viruses, but cyanobacteria, which are a whole genus unto themselves, have huge performance capability, which we're only beginning to comprehend.
Yep.
Thank you.
And combining them with SRI, if you combine with SRI, you get the greater root growth, you get the more aerobic soil conditions that are favorable, and you can get more benefit from the
Mm,
particular microbiological intervention.
Yes. Thank you.
Same as with trichoderma.
Yes,
But I'll be
Dr.
interested to see what Radha and February might work out, combining work on cyanobacteria with work on trichoderma, because there may be some synergies there to be capitalized upon.
Definitely. Definitely. Mhm. It was good to see everybody today. I mean, I haven't seen February, and Norman, I've not seen you for so many years now. I keep thinking, but travel to US has become very less. So I haven't come that side. So I haven't.
I apologize.
And Margaret, I hope she's good.
She's out in the garden.
Oh, okay. Okay. I've
Uh,
gone and stayed in Norman's house, you know.
Since we and while I unfortunately didn't have time to look at every part of your presentation, I think we have another question now. Again from Ivan. May I also know what carrying or microorganism immobilization agent was used for the cyanobacteria inoculant in your research, and how long it can be stored at room temperature? Very specific.
Yeah, we have the carrier-based one, which I talked about. The one wherein we are using paddy straw compost and vermiculite in the ratio of 1:1 as the carrier. And when we need to coat it onto the seed or to the roots of the seedlings, we use the carboxymethyl cellulose 1% solution as a sticker. Because for the most of the microbial biofertilizers, they use sugar syrup, basically, which is the rough sugar. But for cyanobacteria, we have done work, and we have found that carboxymethyl cellulose is the best. So when we give our packets of the biofertilizer, we also give them the carboxymethyl cellulose inside so that they can make a solution. It makes it up like a very sticky one, and it helps to stick to the seed or to the roots. Therefore, it helps to, be there wherever it should be.
Okay. And with no other questions currently in the chat, I will ask one of my own, which is, in your perspective, Radha, what have you found is the largest blocker towards implementing, towards convincing farmers and the like or governments to implement your biofertilizers on a larger scale, given the very clear evidence of the benefits that it provides? So, what is preventing it from being implemented at larger scales?
I would believe it is basically growing these organisms because you see, bacteria can grow in flask, the different media that people are more aware. While these organisms are to be grown, they need sunlight basically, and it's easy to grow as the earliest technology, as I said, rural oriented, which was just growing them there. But the farmer, and these are slow growing as compared to bacteria. Like bacteria would be able to grow, they have a doubling time of 1 hour, 2 hours, but these organisms you would need 10 days. So sometimes I feel the farmer, the infrastructure that is needed for growing them, if he doesn't have, or he doesn't have the patience to grow them and then use them, that is one of the major bottlenecks. So what I believe the government should do is, kind of, educate the people to develop such small pieces of, what do you call, tanks or something, even in the soil they can make and grow and use it for their own field and then distribute it to the farmers, because it's a very easy to grow them. It's nothing difficult. The only thing is that they need to learn. And I think education more than anything else, and the fact that it takes some time to grow are among the field, that farmer adoption is not as good as we would have liked it to be.
Yeah. No, I understand. And I suppose on the other side, what have you had any success in presenting this at a regional or governmental level, say, to try to enact that sort of education? Because you need to, it's the sort of thing that in order for it to stick, it requires it requires the grassroots movement, and it requires some push from above. So bringing it to government or regional agricultural agencies after demonstrating its efficacy, and then trying to then at a large scale, you both have the certification of authority from a government as well as from a body of authority, as well as the resources of that group to convince farmers to trust that it will work as advertised. Have you had some success?
Yeah, we produce it here at our own institute in my own lab conditions and all, where I have those tanks and I produce them, and we are giving it to the farmers. The farmers are aware. They come back every year to take the biofertilizer. So that means they are convinced of the qualities. The growing them is, I think, what is the main thing that they don't, they find that it is not because of the time lag that it takes. That is only the deterrent. Otherwise, they are coming back. I get, orders from right across the country. People come and take these biofertilizer packets from us. They order it. We send them by post. It is becoming popular, but maybe as against the bacterial ones, because they grow fast, the adoption is faster and more prevalent than these cyanobacteria. I think basically some groups have to take up the kind of production, and if we teach them, and they can grow. And we have what we call as when we go for these programs, we have a lot of farmer programs. Whenever we go, we try to tell them. And but what is needed is, maybe the NGOs or some, these should take it up and teach them to grow them, and then they can have their own product. They need not depend even on us. They can give it to their own community. I would advise it at the community level, this kind of production and use.
Yes, I understand. Yes, Isa, we will be having the recording slides and documents will be uploaded online, and if you want, I can make certain to send it to your email as well, so that you can definitely get access to it. I will make certain of that. Okay, and we
Alex?
have, yep. Yeah, yes, Norman?
Another question. I'm not sure whether Radha has seen the research by February in Malaysia using trichoderma as a biofertilizer, but he did some demonstrations or experiments with farmers where they themselves produced their own trichoderma inoculant, and he got very good benefit cost results as well as good economic results. I don't know how difficult it would be to be multiplying cyanobacteria compared to trichoderma. Maybe February will have some thoughts on that too, but we do know that trichoderma can be multiplied by farmers if given some of the necessary materials, the training and the other things, something $25, but you get like $150 more output on an average rice paddy. So it's very cost effective. But again, my impression is that cyanobacteria are a little more difficult to manage than trichoderma. This is an area where I think many of our SRI, SCI colleagues would be interested in some of the potential there is for really devolving this production of material to farmers themselves. February may have some thoughts on this too.
Yeah, maybe I should look into that too. Yes, definitely I will.
Have you seen the article that was published in Journal Organic Agriculture?
Is it a recent one? I have read other articles of February. I have
Well,
also
this
been a
is about-
reviewer for some of them.
It's still 7 years old, so it's not exactly recent. It'd be something which, in fact, the research network might everyone ought to have, partly just to give the notion of how you can go from laboratory research to actually involve farmers in making their own inoculant. That's the only study
Okay.
which has been done in this case with SRI farmers. But we have a chapter in a book on soil biology done by colleagues at the MS Swaminathan Institute in Chennai, where they have a systematic program, have been training village women to become producers and salespersons and distributors of biofertilizer, many kinds, including trichoderma. This is not central to the SRI challenge, but I think it's a very important augmentation thereof.
Okay. Yeah, I think.
February,
I will
any thoughts?
talk with February.
Norman, we're basically producing the trichoderma based biofertilizer rather using corn as the delivery carrier. And it's quite cheap, and we use a simple pressure cooker to be used by farmers to sterilize the corn, and since trichoderma is actually very easy to grow with the corn, and we're having a lot of trainings with the farmers that farmers can produce their own trichoderma based biofertilizer.
Oh,
And the yield is actually quite good, 40% increase when you're using trichoderma based biofertilizer. We did this trial in Malaysia with the SRI, condition. So we're doing a lot of training with the Thai farmers, Vietnamese farmers, Indonesian. So it's because trichoderma is, easy to grow. So that's when Norman asking you, because the cyanobacteria is it difficult to grow, to produce by farmers?
it is not difficult to grow. It's a time period that it requires to, grow to its full potential. Maybe minimum of 10 days to 15 days. only then only you can harvest. Yeah, so that is the minimum period that you would require, because these organisms have very longer doubling time as compared to fungi. Like, for example, we would, I think, do it after 48 hours to 96 hours. I think the Trichoderma culture we can harvest, we get a good yield. So cyanobacteria need that time period because they go through different phases, the log phase, and then the primary metabolites, and then the secondary metabolites. So therefore, the time period required for them is long. So the farmer, in case the patience, I presume, and is the main reason why, the farmer does not take up. So that's why I would say that organizations which work should, like non-NGOs and other entrepreneurs should, kind of initiate such places where they can grow. So once a facility is set up, it can be used by all. And as Norman also suggested, maybe I should talk to the farm women, educating them to, how important they are. I think so. That's a good one. So maybe I'll try that. I would be superannuating from my service next year in August. So I would have a lot of ample time to, do that, because now we are so much in the bureaucratic jungle here, with so much of paperwork and so much of, unnecessary, doing a lot of paperwork only. So I think then I will have the time, and I will try to do that in my lifetime, definitely.
Sounds good.
Yep.
Thank you.
Fantastic. And we are almost out of time for questions, so I would like to encourage anybody who has any final questions. We are about to please speak them now, otherwise we will be moving on, and the opportunity to ask the good doctor directly will be lost, and that would be a very unfortunate thing to occur. And
Alex, let me make one observation. One of the things we're trying to think through here at Sri Rice and consulting with various other colleagues is a way in which we can get kind of subgroups, working groups, discussion groups going. Clearly within our SRI community, within the SRI researcher community, there's a subgroup that's really interested in the use of microorganisms, biofertilizers, and so forth. Radha and February have been the two who published the most in this so far. There's probably a lot of other work. It would be nice if we could have a chat group, some kind of connection among, and especially people who are just getting into this. They might not be able to participate very actively, but they certainly would be welcome listeners. Flies on the wall to see the discussions going on and encourage more and more people. When we've had the national SRI conferences in India in 2006, 2007, 2008, when the WWF was still supporting SRI work, there were each time a number, 2 or 3 very good papers on the use of biofertilizers and microorganisms with SRI, but there was no structure, no connectivity, which would lead that to being a sort of a whole more than the sum of its parts. So I'd encourage the research network and all of us to think about how we could, everyone won't work on this, but a subset can do some very good work, help each other, and that will in turn help all the rest of us who have other interests, but who could then benefit from these new techniques and new opportunities that the focus on microorganisms as part of the SRI formula would get.
I agree, and I think I think it, in many ways it gets to the heart of both the presentation itself and what we are here to do. I'm afraid we are about to run out of time entirely, so I will move on to the final section, which is the closing, in which I would say that what we have seen here is an example of how synergistic and the potential for symbiosis, not only between different plants with benefits to the entire ecosystem, both the micro ecosystem of within the soil itself and upon the plants, but also symbiosis between different techniques. There is, in theory, there are not exactly many connections between something like SRI and microbes, but in reality, the two are intimately linked together. Both benefit the other. They do not compete with one another, and they have similar issues in their implementation and scaling. They both require greater education. They require a certain degree of trust from the farmer and those implementing them that they will be effective, but the results that they have are comprehensive and proven by decades of scientific research. I would say that the research of Dr. Parasana proves this quite comprehensively, as does the research of all those within the network who research not only SRI itself, but other assorted additional areas in which SRI can be applied. And other crops can also benefit from the methods of from part of SRI implementation knowledge. And so I think we can take from this session moving forward that we should be very comprehensive in our looking for the efficient synergies that we can to try to promote them as a whole package part, as opposed to being very strict in our definition of what SRI and what effective agroecological techniques are. Because as Radha has pointed out, SRI is beneficial for the changing world that we live in, and when combined with what we have seen today, its efficacy is improved even further. And I think that is something we should be wanting to encourage, and I think it is something we want to incorporate as much as possible. And so I thank you all for your patience. I understand that we have run a bit over time and that I am not the person that you have come here to see and hear speak to you, but I thank you for staying over time, and we will be making certain that everybody who desires it will get access to the extensive presentation that we were not able to fully view, so that you can examine it for your own viewing pleasure, and making sure that the recording will also be made available. And please, if you have a moment, I'll go through the form that has been linked in the chat so that your feedback can be made known and appreciated. Thank you to everybody who attended. Thank you so much to Dr. Parasana for coming and speaking with us, and thank you to February and the rest of the SRI network for organizing this excellent event. And
Alex, can we take some photos before?
Of course,
Yes.
yes. And just getting to that. And the last thing we want to do is take some photos before everybody leaves. And if ready, so we are ready whenever you are. And if you are not comfortable with that, please let us know.
Thomas, are you ready to take photos?
Yes. Okay. So thank you, Alex. So now I will take a quick screenshot of all the participants. So everyone, please turn on your camera for a moment if it's possible.
Yep.
And I will start from the first slide. Okay, in 3, and 2, and 1. Okay, so one more slide.
Yep.
In 3, 2, and 1. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alex, for moderating and giving me a lot of points to, what I should speak in a more layman language, perhaps, to make everyone understand. And I enjoyed the questions, and I enjoyed all the enthusiasm shown by all of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Radha. Thank
Thank you.
you, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Norman.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. And
Bye.
thank you for attending.
you,
no matter
Radha.
where you are in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Radha. Thank you.
Congrats.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ready one?